Salvador Perez is heating up as the weather gets warmer. Do Chance and I believe that it's for real and here to stay? We'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Thursday edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. We're joined by the host of the Locked On Royals postcast, Chance Liebau, today. We usually like to try to do these every time we've got an off day, which, of course, tonight that is the case for the Royals. So we'll have three segments as usual that we will be going over. We'll talk Salvador Perez, we'll talk Carter Jensen, and we'll just talk about where we think this team is at right now after sweeping the Pittsburgh Pirates. But for the new listeners out there wanting to know how you can catch this podcast and the postcast, it's however you listen to your podcast. You can also follow Chance and I on Twitter. I am at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And Chance, I don't have my Twitter name pulled up in front of me, so why don't you tell everybody how they can follow you?
Yeah, it's at Chance Liebau. It's spelled pretty weird. It's ChanceLiebeau. Or if you're watching live, or not live, I guess my shows are live. Usually I can say that. If you're watching the video portion of it, you can find it right by my name tag here.
Yeah, you got the tougher job. You go live. I get the pre-recorded part. I believe I've said that before. So if I screw up, I'm able to go back and edit some things. You don't really have that luxury. And I had the same problem happen to me, though, when all my connection went haywire when I was filling on the postcast. There's nothing I can do about it just because we were live. If it was happening during one of my shows, I could just start the whole thing over. But before we dive into today's show, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. So the Royals swept the Pittsburgh Pirates. They are now 46-48. And following the Twins' loss earlier this afternoon, they sit alone in second place in the American League Central. And even though a few episodes ago I said, let's not pay attention to the wild card race, you just got to focus on your own record, focus on the teams ahead of you. For some of you out there that still want to focus on that stuff, if the Mariners lose to Boston tonight, that would then put Boston in the third wild card spot. Also, if I'm missing one more here. That's right. The Rangers and the Angels. If the Rangers are to beat the Los Angeles Angels, then the Royals would be 2.5 games back of the wild card. Actually, I should walk that back a little bit because if Boston beats Seattle, then I believe they still would be 3 games. But what's not going to change is that they are in second place in the American League Central. We're feeling much better than we were a week ago in talking about this team. Let's talk Salvador Perez, though, Chance, because I know a lot of people are probably speaking highly of him after last night's performance, after what he's done of late. Is this the Salvador Perez we can get used to in the second half? Or do you believe that this might just be a hot month or two, and after the All-Star break, we're probably going to get closer to the April and May version of Salvador Perez?
I mean, with the way Salvy's been hitting, I don't think we can expect him to hit this, 360 over the last, month and a half and change. I mean, he's been really hot here recently. I think this is kind of who he is right now, and it's one of the reasons why I think that after this year, you kind of have to keep Salvy around, because as bad as he can be at times, which he can be really rough at times, he can have a 2-week stretch where he looks like one of the best power hitters in all of baseball. He can run into a couple, but you've kind of got to deal with the 15-game stretches where he's guessing wrong or he's playing with something. You can tell he's playing hurt. I mean, I said last night on the show, the 2 stretches where he's been at his best this season was this stretch right now when he's been catching less because he's kind of got that injury they're dealing with. It's why they brought up Luke Maile. But also in that Rockies stretch when he came out and was playing a little bit injured and they forced him to kind of a DH role. So I think that if they continue to use him as kind of a first base / DH guy, like I think is what you bring him back to be next year, I think that leads you into a better Salvador Perez, because he can't catch every day. He just can't do it anymore. And Freddie is so much better behind the plate than Salvy. You are losing so much value, not only by playing Salvy behind the plate, but also with his bat if you catch him, because he is statistically much better when he's playing first or DHing. So I think this is kind of a hot stretch that he's in right now, but I think that that's kind of what you have to deal with Salvy. He's going to be hot for, 6 weeks out of the season. You kind of got to deal with those stretches where he just isn't really performing well. And you got to hope that the guys behind him are carrying the load, which they just haven't been in this season.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a constant for Salvador Perez really over his entire year. I mean, you can copy paste conversations that we've had about Salvador Perez for the last 3 years. And when he's in a bit of a slump, when he's struggling, people are starting to wonder, is this the regression point? Is this where he finally falls off? And then he kind of reverts back to a younger version of himself where he can hit 300 for a month. He can run into 15 to 20 home runs over the course of a month and a half. And, it's not a small sample size. It'd be one thing if Salvador Perez was hitting well just in July, which he's got a OPS north of 1,200 so far in the first 9 to 10 games. He's also OPSing 928 over the last month, and he's OPSing over 830 in the last 40 games. We're talking about not quite half of his last games, but pretty close to it. And when the weather warms up, we've seen this a few times with certain players in the lineup, they do start to play much better. And for a lot of people back in April and May that said you got to get him out of there, you can no longer play him every single day, there is an issue with just taking him out of the lineup. And I love Freddie Fermin as much as the next guy. I know you're a big Freddie Fermin guy. Freddie also had the role last year when Vinny got hurt because they put Salvy over at first base, and Freddie became the everyday catcher for about 3 weeks or so, and he didn't play well in that role. I'm pretty sure that Mac Quatrero and this coaching staff understand that he's just one of those guys that can't be an everyday player, but you can play him more than a bench guy. However, if they get this version of Salvador Perez hitting in the 5-hole, it drastically changes what some of these other guys can do, what Nick Lofton can do, what Jack Caglione can do, what Michael Garcia can do, getting more hittable pitches. And that's going to be, as we've talked about before, the top 3 in this lineup, Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny Pasquantino, and Salvador Perez. I'd like to throw Garcia in here, but he kind of goes for my narrative of if Salvy plays better, he naturally will play better. You get those 3 going, the possibilities are endless in the second half. And unfortunately for Salvy, he's not one of those hitters that when he's going well, it's going to carry into the third month and the fourth month. He's going to go through slumps again because he's just not somebody that takes some of those ugly pitches. If he can stay this hot, though, for another month, month and a half, I'd be very curious to know where this offense might be at. Are you there in that same debate chance where if Salvador Perez can OPS 830 for the next month and a half, are we going to see a group that's more comparable to last year, or are you going to see some other guys start to struggle that may have been hot for the first 90 to 95 games?
I go with the former. I mean, one of the things that they had going for them last season that I just watching them, and even coming into the season, the reason I was kind of high on them, I had a ticket on them to make the playoffs. The reason I was so high is because they didn't have sure outs in that lineup. And that's the one thing that got them in trouble this year. MJ Melendez wasn't out. Hunter Renfroe wasn't out. Michael Massey wasn't out. And then other guys would go, dip and rise. That's kind of what we saw from them early in the season. Salvy, for a good half of the season was an out. And that is where the Royals got in trouble, was they just had too many sure thing outs in the lineup. And if Salvy can be at least a challenge at the plate, he doesn't have to OPS, 9 whatever. He can be a 750, 800 OPS guy, and this offense will take off because you had a guy in the middle of that lineup that was a double play machine. I mean, every time it felt like Vinny would get on in front of him, it felt like they were turning 2. If Salvy can at least be competent and challenge pitchers and not be a guy they can pitch around and focus on a guy after him, I think that just raises the floor of this lineup because he's not a sure out when he's on. He is clicking right now, and he's a guy that you can't pitch around because he'll make a mistake hurt.
And the power has been on display, at least here in July. I mean, that was something we weren't even seeing in his recent hot stretch when he was hitting well back in maybe it was May for a period of time, the home runs weren't there. Now you were starting to see the home runs start to add up a little bit. If that can carry into the later portions of July and into August and September, we really could see an offense that might be middle of the pack when it's all said and done. Let's take our first break of the show here. When we come back, we're going to keep talking about catchers in the organization, but one that has really burst onto the scene in AAA, and that would be Carter Jensen. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk of Carter Jensen's debut in first 12 games in Omaha. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. We are back here on Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. We've also got the host of the Royals Postcast in Chance Liebau, talking Salvador Perez, soon to be talking about Carter Jensen, and then where we see this team through their 46-48 record. Are they back to being buyers? Should they still be sellers? We'll get to that in the final segment of today's show. Before we go any further, I want to tell you about Gametime, today's title sponsor. Have you ever decided last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off. Download the Gametime app, last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's stick with our catcher talk here on today's episode. And with it being an off day, we can spend a little time talking about the Royals themselves, but also what's going on down on the farm. And Carter Jensen's probably the biggest name that everybody's been talking about, and it's only been 12 games. And I was a little bit skeptical at first for all the home runs that were being shown on Twitter. He had like 4 or 5 in the first handful of games, and then he just continued to show up with doubles and gappers and hitting the ball hard. But the average wasn't quite there. You were seeing an average that was sub 200. He was striking out north of 30% of the time. And it's not that we need to be rushing Carter Jensen to the show. It's not that he needs to go down there and hit 400 so that he can prove he's ready for Kansas City. I don't view Carter Jensen being with the Royals this year. I feel that getting him to AAA was a big step. Now it's just about him playing out the rest of the year there. Then you can reevaluate it in the offseason and in spring training, which he's been in the Royals spring training the last 2 years. But these numbers through 12 games have been incredibly impressive. He's no longer hitting under 200. He's actually slashing 277, 358 with a 745 slug, an OPS north of 1100, 6 home runs, 17 runs driven in, 10 extra base hits, and a WRC plus that is 73 points above the league average. And he just turned 22 exactly a week ago. He has been one of my favorite prospects because he's a local kid and also that the Royals developed him. Chance, here's my first question, though, because everybody seems to be asking this. Well, if he's hitting so well, where is he going to play? Because Salvador Perez is somebody we just talked about, and though he's got the club option that will be this offseason, everybody's going to be wondering, is he back or not? What is the future for Carter Jensen? Is he going to stay behind the plate? Is he going to be somebody that if Salvador Perez is back next year, you got to trade Freddie Fermin? Or is this something where we need his bat in the lineup, and like it was with Jack Caglione, he's going to have to learn another position while Salvador Perez is still here?
I mean, it's a really good question. I'm sure it's one that the Royals brass is going to have to answer at some point, if not this offseason here in the next couple of weeks, because he's not the only guy in that system that can catch and is going to, challenge for that catcher position once Salvy moves on. I think that I continue to think that he's going to be the catcher next season. I think that you can still keep Freddie Fermin, although I don't think it would be a bad idea if they decided to capitalize on him, because if I'm not mistaken, I feel like Freddie's in his first year of arbitration next year, so you're going to have to pay him more than the league minimum. And this is a Royals offense that is about to get a little bit expensive because they've got a lot of young guys on the roster right now that aren't making a whole lot of money. I mean, Vinny is going to enter his first year of arbitration. Kyle Isbell, the same way. Michael Massey. Those guys are going to cost more than they are now, exponentially in some cases. So I think that trading a guy like Freddie is going to be something that the Royals consider this offseason, and I think it's something that they should do. But where I get a little worried and a little bit, cautious is catching at the big league level is really hard. There is a lot of knowledge that you have to intake and then, utilize out on the field, calling games. Does Brian Sweeney start calling games? Does the pitcher start to call games? I mean, we saw it with MJ Melendez. It was just too much for him. And then his bat suffered because he had to learn the outfield in the middle of the season. So I think I've long said that I think Carter Jensen is the answer at the catcher position. I know Blake Mitchell has a little bit more pedigree as a prospect, but you don't draft a local kid like Carter Jensen and then decide that he's not going to be a piece of your future when he's doing what he's doing in Omaha right now, which is absolutely crushing baseballs. But I'd pump the brakes a little bit. He's only played 12 games right now. I think you have to see him slump and see how he responds. Kind of like with Jack Caglione. He had to take his lumps at the big league level. With Carter Jensen, next year's team, they're going to build towards 26. With next year's team, can you afford for Carter Jensen to hit 120 for a month and still throw him out there every game, especially considering, what they're going to have invested in next year's team? So I think that he's the catcher going into 2026, but maybe you keep Freddie around as a guy that can hit against lefties and, give him 4 days of the week where he's catching. But I think that calling him a can't miss prospect is kind of bearing the lead. He's a very good prospect, a top 100 guy. I like him a lot. I think he's the catcher of the future. But I think we have to see how he responds to adversity before we really dub him as the guy going forward.
And it's incredibly unfortunate that Blake Mitchell got hurt in spring training, because I'd love to know what these numbers would look like side by side, because I felt that every time Carter would move up a level, you would have Blake moving up a level. So Carter Jensen started in Double-A. I anticipated Blake Mitchell being in Quad Cities. And then when he got the bump, if Blake Mitchell was hitting well, now you just have Mitchell replacing him in Double-A. I'm still not out on Blake Mitchell because the organization is so high on him. And we'll see what he looks like coming off of this broken hand injury. Carter, though, is one of those prospects. As I said, being a local guy, I'm sure that the organization is tied to a little bit. I know that he's going to be brought up in trade discussions, whether the Royals want to do that or not. I just don't want to move him from that position. You had to do that with Caglione. I feel you're being a little bit too aggressive when we're moving around all these pieces because you're trying to keep Salvador Perez on the roster. Now, I actually see Salvy being back next year. I do not see this being the final year. I see him being a Royal for life, and however they're going to make that work, that's going to be the case. You also could run into that snag where the Royals could tell Salvy, we've got someone here that's going to be an everyday catcher. You're going to be more of a bench guy. And he may say, well, I want to go play somewhere else. I do want to play where they're still going to give me every day at bats. But for Carter, I compare this a little bit to Vinny Pasquantino, where Vinny was that guy, not a can't-miss prospect. You had to develop him. He was a much later pick than Carter was, who was a second-round pick. But Vinny
too. I mean, Vinny was college, so
he went to Old Dominion, so lesser competition there than someone in the SEC like Jack Caglione. But they almost took too much time with Vinny. Like everywhere he went, he seemed to stay an extra month or two, and now you've got someone who's been in the above league average bat for 3 years. And when you look at Carter Jensen, I kind of want them to take that approach. Even if he hits 300 to close out this year and you really like what he can be in the future, I'm not going to hate it if the first half of next year, he's still in AAA. And if he can prove that, last year was not just me dominating pitching because they didn't really have a book on me. If he can do it again in the first half, then the second half, I'm saying, all right, you've got a 23-year-old catcher that can really help you in a playoff push, and you can figure it out later with Salvador Perez. I'm high on him, and it's not the same thing as Jack Caglione, where you've got a bat that is a little bit more polished, and I know some people aren't going to agree with that because of how Caglione is played, but I don't want to handle him the same way they did Caglione, where you're trying to get him up to the big league level after how many games? 40, 45. With Carter Jensen, I'm fine taking a long time because they have a catcher. They can put Salvador Perez there. They can put Freddie Fermin there. If he was in a position like left field where there's nobody out there right now, then maybe you can have that conversation. But I'm fine slow playing it with him. I've really been impressed with what he's done so far in AAA. He is on some type of tear right now. But Chance, you're exactly right. This is a guy that's only played 12 games, and we have learned a little bit of a lesson that Jack Caglione, who made a mockery of AA, made a mockery of AAA, still went through those struggles. But at least Jack Caglione was a college bat. Carter Jensen was a high school bat. He is hitting, professional pitchers right now that might have even been at the big league level at some point. Still, a good start for him. I'm fine keeping him down there and really slow playing it because you do have two catchers right now on the big league roster that are playing pretty much every single day. Let's take our final break of the show. When we come back, Chance and I are going to tell you where we think this team is at right now. That's next on Locked On Royals. We are back here on Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. That's Chance Liebau, the host of the Locked On Royals postcast. Find us on wherever you listen to your podcast. For our final shout out, we're going to tell you about OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? Nope, you just called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important, and that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. OpenPhone is offering Locked On Royals listeners 20% off on your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's OpenPhone.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Royals are riding high with a 4-game winning streak. They got the off day today, which is what we're probably going to do moving forward. Anytime we have an off day, Chance is going to join us. We'll go back and forth on what we think about the team. They've got the Mets coming into town this weekend. They're going to see two guys that are coming off the IL. Kodai Senga, who was the league leader in ERA before he got hurt a few weeks back. So he will be pitching on Friday. Not going to be on a pitch restriction. Sunday, former Royals farmhand and prospect Sean Manaea is going to be coming off the injured list. He will be piggybacked by Clay Holmes. At least that's what the Mets beat reporters were saying. And then on Saturday, it'll be Frankie Montas going for New York. Where are you at with this team, Chance? Because I understand we can buy into all the hype, all the optimism now that they're playing good baseball. The offense is playing better. They're still 46-48 and have a few teams to leapfrog before we can say that this team is a definitive buyer. So are you on they're leaning toward buyer, they should still be selling, they should do a little bit of both? Where are you at?
I mean, the way I describe this team is a really streaky team with a lot of holes. And I think that they are going to do a little bit of both in terms of buying and selling. It wouldn't surprise me if there's a Michael Lorenzen trade where he goes to a team like the Dodgers and he can kind of be a bridge guy, bullpen sometimes, starter sometimes, with Shohei, who knows what he's going to look like in a couple months from now, being that guy after Shohei, and then bringing back a guy like James Outman, who had some good stretches last year, and a guy the Dodgers just absolutely do not need whatsoever. Or if he gets traded to, I'm saying he, but there could be a lot of moves that the Royals make. I think that you and I are both have this idea that the Royals have so much pitching depth that they can afford to move a guy like Seth Lugo and Michael Lorenzen and kind of be okay with it. And I think that they are going to do some movement with the pitching staff, especially guys like, I think you and I are both on the same page where I think they should trade one of their lefties, whether that's Sam Long, Daniel Lynch, or Angel Serpa, because like the other guys in the lineup, they're going to get expensive this year. But I think they just have to add, and I'm not saying you have to go out and get a Jarren Duran or an Adolis Garcia, but I kind of compared it last night to a Paul DeYoung move where he's not a guy that is going to play every day. He's not a guy that's going to grab a bunch of headlines, but he is a guy that is going to probably hit in the 7, 8, 9 hole, but he's going to give you competitive at-bats. And when he's hot, he's going to be a force in that lineup, a guy that you can rely on. It kind of what they envisioned, I'm sure, for Mark Canha. I mean, if Mark Canha can be that piece, then they don't have to go trade for him. But something that you can trust on a day-in, day-out basis. You don't know what you're getting from Nick Lofton ever. You never know what you're going to get from Kyle Isbell. You know that Drew Waters is a AAA bat. He has been overexposed now. So getting a guy, and I mean, heck, even Tommy Pham, who we saw over the weekend, like I'd love to get a Tommy Pham back in Kansas City because that's a guy that you can hit in the bottom of the order. He's not going to hurt you. And I think even more than anything, he's a great clubhouse guy for this team that since Hunter Renfroe left, they don't have a whole lot of vets in that clubhouse. And obviously they got some pitchers, but in that lineup, in the batting cages, they don't have a bunch of vets. It's a lot of young guys that I've described as front runners. Things are going well, they're high. They're really excited. But when things are going poorly, they don't have a guy to sort things out for them. I think a Tommy Pham would be excellent for that. There's obviously the familiarity there, and the Pirates are going to be sellers. There's no reason for him to be on that roster once August comes around.
And we are starting to see a little bit more now that teams are becoming clear sellers, whereas a month ago you couldn't really identify. Like Miami was a clear seller a month and a half ago, and now they're above the Braves in the National League East. You never really know with some of these teams. What I am leaning toward is that if they are going to be buying, they're going to be going after guys that are long-term fits. And what I mean by that is players with multiple years of control. If they have to give up Seth Lugo in a deal like that, I still believe that it can make a lot of sense. I just would like them to also get a pitcher back in return for that, because I'm not a believer in their depth right now. I don't believe Daniel Lynch can start. I don't believe Serpa can start. I know in the offseason some teams were interested in him being a starter. I don't see Dallas Keuchel or Rich Hill being the answer there. Luender Avila is not healthy. So if they do acquire some bats, I would love to see them have a AAA arm as well, or somebody that could be penciled into the rotation. But why I have a hard time believing a rental like a Tommy Pham or a Mike Tauchman would make sense is they're not to that buying point yet where they know they're making the playoffs. So going after a rental, yes, can help you. And who knows, maybe to close out the month of July, they look like the 2024 Detroit Tigers, where they're playing 10, 15 games over 500. Now they're definitive buyers. That's when Tommy Pham makes sense. That's when Mike Tauchman makes sense. But if you're going to make that strong push in the second half, I feel you got to go out there and get a game-changing bat, not just for this year, but for next year. We keep hearing about Jarren Duran, Wilyer Abreu. Actually, earlier today, ESPN Wichita, who you and I both, collab for, I guess I should say, David Lesky, Inside the Crown. We've referenced him multiple times in this podcast. He brings up a name like Wilyer Abreu. And Boston is kind of in that same spot as the Royals of you're trying to get a wild card spot. If they said, we want Seth Lugo and we'll give you Wilyer Abreu or Jarren Duran, do you pull the trigger? Because those are two guys that are not just answers for this year, but for next year as well. And that's where it becomes a question for JJ Picollo of, do you make that move where you get help with the offense? You also need to fill the number 2 spot in your rotation. Maybe that's Cole Reagans and you go with an opener until he's ready. That's just what I'm more fascinated to know with this front office is, has this recent style of play changed their mind and how they want to go about this? Or are they going to hang on to Seth Lugo and try to get some bats like a Tommy Pham, like a Tauchman, like some of those rental guys that could just help them out for the last couple months? I just would like to see them almost start their offseason early. Not they can't make the playoffs this year, but we know what the market looked like last offseason. Who's to say it can't be the same thing where none of these guys fit the price match for the Royals? And why not go out there and try to trade for a few bats that can be there next year as well?
Yeah, and I'm of the opinion that I think that Blake Mitchell is a guy that is expendable because, I mean, the worst case scenario for the Royals coming into the year was a guy like Blake Mitchell did not hit well and they tried to trade him. He's been injured right now, and his prospect status, I'm not sure if you've seen the pipeline rankings. He's like a top 40 prospect in baseball and has taken like 5 at-bats in Quad Cities. Like, he's a guy that I know that it's going to be tough to swallow. It would be a tough pill to swallow if they traded the top pick from 3 years ago, 2 years ago. But he's a guy that is blocked by Carter Jensen, potentially by Freddie Fermin, and Ramon Ramirez is nipping at his heels. And I know the glove is borderline elite, but we were told the same thing with MJ Melendez. So I do have my concerns when it comes to a guy like Blake Mitchell, where, you see some of these teams pop up their prospects a little bit to Jim Callis or these prospect ranking places to make them more valuable in a trade package to a team that might not have a scout at every Quad Cities game or might not have their finger on the pulse of the Royals minor league system. They see a top 40 guy being dangled for a Jaron Duran or an Adolis Garcia, then things start to become a little bit more enticing for them to make a trade, even though they have barely played it all this year, but they've only gotten better as a prospect ranking. That's where, I kind of do my Brian Windhorst. Okay, what's going on here? He's barely played, but he continues to rise the prospect rankings. I'd be curious if they dangle Blake Mitchell at all, if they make a trade for a guy like Jaron Duran.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at when it comes to dealing someone like Blake Mitchell or Blake Walters, a Hero Wyatt, some guys that are younger but really have tremendous upside. I got to know the player that they're getting in return is going to be a strong piece in the second half. Whereas someone like Adolis Garcia, I'm not going to give up that name because I don't know if he's going to turn things on in the second half. Whereas someone like a Duran or a Abreu, which who knows what Boston would want to do. They might want to keep both those guys. I know they've got a log jam in the outfield, but they're winning games. So they may say, we're not shopping any of these guys. But if you're the Royals and you really want some of those guys, you might have to part ways with one of those top prospects that you have and just live with whatever happens. Because as Rex Hudler once famously said in the Andrew Benintendi trade, you will always trade a boy for a man. Now, last question I have for you, Chance. This comes from Jeff. It's about Salvador Perez, and we'll close with this. A little fun one here that for 2025, do you think he has a better chance of getting to 300 home runs, which I want to say at this point he is 16 or 17 shy? I'm pulling up his baseball reference right now.
You beat me
he's 14 shy, actually. Okay. So 14 shy, second half. Or does he have a better chance of getting to 1,000 RBIs for his career? Right now, he is at 970. So 30 RBIs or 14 home runs. If he gets the home runs, he's going to get the RBIs anyway.
Yeah.
But what do you think
comes first?
He gets to first, yeah.
I'd probably have to say the RBI. It feels like RBI, especially with how the top of the lineup's hitting and the way he's been playing right now. I mean, I saw yesterday that he was third in the American League in doubles. I was caught off guard by that. I mean, he's still a run producing machine. Just hasn't had guys in front of him that can produce like that. But now, I mean, yeah, absolutely. 30 more RBIs. He could have that by the roster expansion. I mean, that could be something that he gets very quickly, and hopefully he gets both of them. But it would not surprise me if he got both of them before the end of the year, especially with the way he's hitting right now. And like you said, the weather heating up, that ball starts to fly wherever you're playing.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the RBI there as well. I'm going to give him an outside chance because he seems to be just crushing the ball right now. But I could see him getting to 84 RBIs on the season, even if he's not having a ton of power. If this offense starts to turn things on and they add a bat or two that can help the top half of the lineup, I can see him getting 30 RBIs here to close out the 2025 season. Well, Chance, thank you as always. We're definitely going to be planning to do this for every Royals off day, and we'll look forward to the Royals postcast tomorrow night for the New York Mets, all right?
Yeah, I can't wait. Looking forward to it, Jack. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. That'll do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. That's Chance Liebau, the host of the Locked On Royals postcast. And before we say goodbye, thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale and find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, it'll be a Mailbag Friday, so get your questions in below on this video and look for my tweet a little bit later on tonight. But until tomorrow, you take it easy, Kansas City.